He felt it before he saw it. A sharp sting on his ankle, sudden and precise, gone in less than a second. When he looked down, there was no attacker in sight, only 2 small marks on his skin, and a feeling spreading upward that he had never felt before. What happened to him in the next few hours decided something far bigger than just his own survival, and by the end of this, you will understand why a single snake bite could quietly reshape how an entire ancient group approached the wild around them. Stay through this one, because the part about what his body actually did next is not what most people expect. To understand what a snake bite meant to an ancient human, you first have to understand how little control he had over the outcome. There was no way to know which snake had bitten him, no way to know how much venom had entered his body, and no way to know whether the next hour would end in recovery or death. Every single reaction from that point forward came from instinct, observation, and whatever his group had learned from watching it happen to someone before him. The first response was almost always physical panic control. Ancient humans quickly learned, likely through repeated tragic experience, that moving the bitten limb too much sped up how fast venom spread through the body. So the very first instinct that mattered was not running or fighting. It was forcing the body to stay as still as possible, even while every nerve was screaming to move. This alone tells you something important. Survival here was not about strength. It was about controlling fear long enough to make a smarter choice than the body wanted to make. Once the bitten man was still, the group around him had to make a series of fast decisions with almost no reliable information. Was the snake venomous? Was it not? Would the swelling stop on its own, or would it keep spreading toward his chest? Ancient humans had no textbook for this. What they had was pattern memory, a mental catalog built from every previous bite anyone in the group had witnessed, survived, or lost someone to. Some groups appear to have developed early forms of wound treatment based purely on trial and observation. Cutting near the bite site was one method some communities used, based on the belief that letting blood flow outward could carry venom away from the body. Modern medicine now understands this method rarely worked, and could sometimes make things worse by increasing blood flow and speeding up circulation. But at the time, with zero understanding of how venom actually moved through the bloodstream, it was a logical attempt based on the information available. Other groups focused instead on binding the limb tightly above the bite, an instinct that, interestingly, lines up much more closely with what we now understand about slowing venom spread by restricting blood flow. This was almost certainly discovered by accident, likely from noticing that survivors who happened to have something tied around the limb for entirely unrelated reasons seemed to fare better than those who did not. Ancient survival knowledge often worked this way, not through understanding why something worked, but through repeatedly noticing that it did. Now think about this for a moment. If you were standing in that ancient camp, watching someone you knew get bitten, with no doctor, no antivenom, and only what your group had seen work or fail before, what is the very first decision you think you would have made? Would you have kept him still, tried to suck out the venom the way old stories describe, or simply prepared for the worst? Leave your answer below, because the choices people imagine here often reveal a lot about how they think under pressure. Pain management was its own separate challenge. Venom from certain snakes could cause intense burning, swelling, and in some cases significant nerve pain that lasted for hours. Ancient humans had access to certain plants that could dull pain or reduce swelling, and groups that had passed down this kind of plant knowledge across generations had a real survival advantage over isolated groups. Without it, this is one of the clearest examples of how ancient medical knowledge, passed only through memory and demonstration, could directly determine who lived and who did not. Time played a brutal role in all of this. Without any way to measure venom concentration or track how quickly it was spreading, ancient humans had only rough estimates based on visible symptoms: increasing swelling, changing skin color around the bite, difficulty breathing in more severe cases. Each of these signs forced the group to reassess constantly, often changing their approach every few minutes as the situation evolved in front of them. There is a psychological layer here that rarely gets discussed. A snake bite did not just threaten one person. It reshaped the fear response of the entire group watching it happen. If someone survived, groups likely built more confidence in their treatment methods and passed that confidence down as informal medical knowledge. If someone did not survive, the opposite happened. Fear intensified. Certain plants or areas became associated with danger, and the group's relationship with the surrounding wilderness shifted, permanently based on that single traumatic event. This is part of why snake encounters left such a deep mark on early human behavior patterns. Even today, fear of snakes remains one of the most consistent and widespread instinctive fears across human cultures, and some researchers believe this fear response may be partly inherited from thousands of generations of ancestors who learned, often through devastating loss, that a snake bite could end a life in a matter of hours with almost no warning. If this part surprised you, that a single bite could shape group behavior for generations, that is worth sitting with for a moment, because it says something about how deeply survival experiences were carried forward long after the actual danger had passed. There is a physical detail about snake bites that rarely gets mentioned, and it changes how we should think about ancient reactions entirely. Not every bite even contained venom. In some cases, a snake bites purely as a defensive reflex without releasing any venom at all, something modern researchers call a dry bite. Ancient humans, of course, had no way of knowing this in the moment. Every single bite had to be treated as a worst-case scenario, because the cost of assuming it was harmless and being wrong was far higher than the cost of overreacting to something that turned out to be minor. This meant ancient survival responses were built around caution by necessity, not because every bite was equally dangerous, but because there was no way to tell the dangerous ones apart from the harmless ones in time to matter. The location of the bite also mattered more than people usually realize. A bite on the ankle or lower leg, far from the chest, gave the body more time before venom reached vital areas, simply due to distance and circulation speed. A bite closer to the torso was far more urgent, and ancient humans who had witnessed enough bites likely developed a rough, unspoken understanding of this, treating leg bites with more patience and upper body bites with far greater urgency. This is another example of survival knowledge that required no formal understanding of anatomy, only repeated exposure and memory. Group composition at the moment of the bite could also change everything. A lone hunter bitten far from camp faced a completely different situation than someone bitten while surrounded by his group. Distance from shelter, distance from anyone who remembered effective treatment methods, and the physical ability to even signal for help all played a role that had nothing to do with the venom itself. In many cases, the difference between survival and death came down not to the severity of the bite, but to how far the person was from others who could respond in time. Not every group faced snakes the same way, though. Groups living in regions with fewer venomous species likely developed far less specialized knowledge, meaning a rare encounter with a dangerous snake could catch them completely unprepared. Meanwhile, groups in regions with consistent exposure to venomous snakes appear to have developed much more refined responses over generations, essentially building an early, informal system of emergency response passed down entirely through observation and memory rather than written instruction. Recovery itself, when it happened, was rarely quick. Even in cases where the bite was not immediately fatal, swelling, weakness, and pain could last for days. During this recovery period, the bitten individual was often far more vulnerable to other dangers, since reduced mobility made it harder to keep up with the group, harder to defend himself if a predator approached, and harder to contribute to gathering food or maintaining shelter. In this sense, a snake bite created a second, quieter danger window that could last long after the original bite occurred. Groups that recognized this appear to have adjusted their behavior accordingly, temporarily slowing their movement, staying closer to a fixed shelter location, or assigning others to watch over the recovering individual more closely than usual. This kind of temporary group reorganization around an injured member is one of the earliest observable examples of cooperative care in human history, something that likely strengthened group bonds even as it created short-term vulnerability. It is worth pausing on something else here. The knowledge gained from surviving a snake bite or watching someone else survive one did not stay isolated to that single event. It became part of a much larger body of practical survival knowledge that shaped how ancient groups moved through their environment altogether. Certain paths through tall grass may have been avoided during specific seasons. Certain rock formations known to shelter snakes may have been approached with more caution. None of this required scientific understanding of snake behavior. It required only consistent observation and memory carried across enough encounters to notice a pattern. This slow accumulation of survival knowledge, built one dangerous encounter at a time, is easy to overlook when we think about ancient human life. It is tempting to imagine early humans reacting to danger purely on instinct alone, but the reality shows something more layered. Instinct handled the first few seconds. Everything after that, the treatment attempts, the movement restrictions, the plant remedies, the long-term caution around certain environments, came from something closer to an early, informal form of accumulated knowledge, built entirely through lived experience rather than any written record. There is one more angle worth mentioning before we close. The men who became known within their group as skilled at treating bites, whether through binding, plant remedies, or simply calm judgment under pressure, likely held a distinct informal role within the tribe. Not a healer in any formal sense, but someone whose memory of past encounters made him the one others turned to first when the moment mattered most. So the next time you picture an ancient human dealing with a snake bite, remember that what happened in that moment was rarely just about one person's survival. It was a live test of everything the group had learned before, applied under pressure, with real consequences either way, and in many cases it directly shaped how that group approached the natural world for the rest of their lives. If this kind of detail is exactly what you come here for, this channel is built entirely around moments like this, the specific instincts, decisions, and consequences that never make it into the usual retelling of ancient human life. The small details that actually determined who survived and who did not, and staying around means you will not miss the next one.